Like their predecessors in all wars, American veterans of the Vietnam campaign returning to civilian life have their minds filled with memories that will last for the rest of their days, no matter how far from the front they may have been. A man will always remember those days when, briefly, his daily existence approached the heroic. The veteran Sven Eriksson, as I will call him in this article, as using his real name could jeopardize his life, has also returned with memories, but he doesn't know how time will affect them. This is how an article published in The New Yorker in October 1969 begins. It did not narrate a story of heroism, but rather of horror. A repentant and ashamed soldier detailed how 4 members of the United States Army kidnapped, gagged, raped, and murdered a young Vietnamese woman just 21 years old. Technicalities and the ineffectiveness of military justice soon freed the perpetrators of one of the most brutal war crimes on record. However, that article, along with the impactful 1989 film Casualties of War, shed light on the case once again. In this new video on military history, we want to transport you to Vietnam in the mid-60s, to meet Phan Thi Mao and the men who took her life in the infamous crime on Hill 192. On November 17, 1966, a meeting took place that led to one of the most heinous crimes in American military history. In that conversation, 20-year-old Sergeant David E. Gervais and 21-year-old soldier Stephen Cabot Thomas spoke with 3 other members of their squad. Their names were Robert Storby, Cipriano S. Garcia, and Jose C. Garcia, all similar age and members of the 2nd Airborne Battalion and the 8th Cavalry Battalion. Gervais and Thomas made plans to, during a reconnaissance mission the next day, forcibly take the first Vietnamese woman they found and abuse her. Many years after that terrifying meeting, and under the pseudonym Sven Eriksson, Soldier Storby would recall, Gervais spoke about getting a woman for sexual relations, and then, after 5 days, killing her. He claimed it would be good for the morale of the troop. With the grim plan presented, it was time to put it into action. Officially, the mission's goal was to reach Hill 192 in the Bong Song Valley, where there was a ravine with an extensive cave complex ideal for Viet Cong activity. The patrol was supposed to gather information about bunkers, trenches, and paths not on the map, as well as locate weapons, ammunition, and equipment depots. Over time, it was revealed that this was just an excuse. Around 5 a.m. on November 18, 1966, an American squad entered the small village of Cat Thuong in the Phu Mai district, southeast of Vietnam. The Washington troops were not there for a military operation or to dismantle an enemy unit, but as sexual predators. That's how they found 21-year-old Phan Thi Mao, whom they snatched from her cabin without paying attention to the cries of her mother and younger sister. Soldiers Gervais, Thomas, Jose Garcia, and Cipriano Garcia gagged her, tied her wrists with a rope, and took her away. It was time to march. They didn't want any helicopters to spot them, so they only stopped sporadically until finding a suitable place for their crime. Later, after setting up camp in an abandoned straw hut, all the men took turns raping Mao during a hellish day. Soldier Robert Storby was present during the attack but did not participate. The next day, amid a firefight with the Viet Cong, Thomas and Gervais became concerned that the woman would be seen with the squad, exposing their crime. Under that risk, Thomas took Mao to a thicket area, and although he stabbed her 3 times with his hunting knife, he didn't manage to kill her, at least initially. When she tried to escape, 3 of the soldiers pursued her, but it was again Thomas who caught her and shot her in the head with his M16 rifle, brutally closing one of the bloodiest crimes perpetrated in Vietnam. Later, during the military trial, Soldier Storby was asked to describe the sound Mao's body made when stabbed. The young man replied, "Well, I hunted and gutted deer. It was like when you stick the knife into the deer, it's a dull sound or something like that." In the face of heinous crimes, there is no camaraderie, and not all soldiers profess the same lack of humanity. That's why Robert Storby reported the multiple rapes carried out on the battlefield. Initially, the chain of command, including the company commander, took no action despite it being an unprecedentedly brutal crime. Storby then received threats against his life from the soldiers who participated in the violation and murder of the young woman, but Robert was determined to see the perpetrators of the crime punished. His persistence in reporting the crime to higher authorities ultimately led to a court-martial against his 4 squadmates. During that process, the victim's name was identified thanks to her sister's words. Thus, Phan Thi Mao was first known as a person with family, friends, and a life ahead. After the trial, soldiers Thomas, Cipriano Garcia, and Jose Garcia were convicted of rape and murder in March and April 1967. On the other hand, Sergeant Gervais was found guilty of murder, but not rape. During Thomas's trial, who carried out the stabbing and the fatal shot that killed the young Vietnamese woman, the prosecutor asked the jury to impose the death penalty on the soldier due to the extreme lack of morality in his behavior, aggravated by being a representative of the army. However, the court ended up sentencing Thomas to life imprisonment. The problem is that this initial sentence was eventually commuted to 20 years. Later, this was reduced to 8 years, making him eligible for parole after serving half of that time in prison. Thomas was released on June 18, 1970, but the incredible thing is that this was not his last encounter with justice. Several years later, in 1992, he was charged as an accomplice in the murder of an African-American sailor aboard the USS Saratoga. Thomas and the perpetrator of the homicide were members and leaders in a white supremacist church known as the World Church of the Creator, deepening the theory that his sexual crime was motivated by profound racial hatred towards the young Vietnamese woman. Similarly, with Thomas, the initial sentence for Sergeant David Edward Gervais was 10 years, but it was reduced to 8, making him eligible for release after serving half of his sentence. This was realized on August 9, 1969. The last nail in the coffin of military justice was hammered in 1968 when Jose Garcia was completely acquitted during the appeal of his initial 15-year sentence. In that setback, his dishonorable discharge from the Army was also overturned, as it was determined that his Fifth Amendment rights were violated during the investigation, leading to the dismissal of his confession as inadmissible. Meanwhile, Cipriano Garcia's sentence was reduced to just 22 months. All soldiers, except for Storby, were discharged from the Army upon their return to the United States. This video begins with an article, and without that material, this story would probably be even less known. The author was journalist Daniel Lang, who not only read the 7 volumes that detail the judicial process, but also traveled to Minneapolis to interview Robert Storby, who narrated the events under a pseudonym. Of all the memories left by the Vietnam War, One recurring image haunted Storby for the rest of his life: the face of a young Vietnamese peasant girl whom he met for 24 hours, the last hours of her life. There are no photos of Mao, but her face was like that of thousands of Vietnamese women who suffered a similar fate. Along with that memory, a question haunted the soldier for years. Could he have done more to save the girl? It's a question with a difficult answer. The truth is that without his testimony, the case would never have gained the notoriety it did. The 1989 film adaptation, directed by Brian De Palma, further brought the Hill 192 crime to public attention. Aberrant acts seem to be a constant in every war. The dehumanization on both fronts brings out the worst in soldiers, turning them into agents of destruction, forgetting the true reasons for which they are fighting. Many studies on the actions of soldiers in Vietnam conclude that practices such as mass shootings or rape were as integral to military operations as bombings or night patrols. It was simply what a soldier had to do. In his interview, Storby reflected on how daily death can change a young mind. From one day to the next, you could see changes in the guys on our side. Decent young men who would never dare to call an Oriental yellow in the United States. But now they were on the other side of the planet, in a strange country where it was difficult to distinguish friend from foe. Regardless of the motivation we choose to believe, the killers of Phan Thi Mao never paid for their crime. So we come to the end of this video. But we would like to hear your opinion on this shocking case. Do you think military justice acted in good faith, or was there an attempt to cover up what happened in Vietnam? Leave your response in the comments box. For now, we bid you farewell until the next installment of Military History. Thank you for joining us.